the Palestinian issue has become unignorable.
What triggered you to talk about the Palestinian cause?
Try to educate people about what this war is really about. What is Zionism? Why is there resistance? What are they motivated by?
Leveraging the power of mainstream media, which was the only prevailing
and
media
it was
back.
The only reason Israel got away with its crimes for so long is because how meticulously and how aggressively they rigged mainstream media to fabricate a completely different reality.
Grew up in
America.
A purely imperial capitalist society.
Right. I could see there were many different victims of U.S. imperialism, including the American people. We have our own problems and our own country. Let's just focus on that and let's stop bothering and oppressing the world.
حلقة جديدة من سردية عز يأتيكم في موسمه الثاني. أسعدتم أوقاتا. ضيفي لليوم هو الدين. الدين, you're most welcome in our show سردية عز, which talks about how the narrative of this other part of the world, which shows the different face of the truth, has gained the upper hand after the 7th of October in comparison to all the different stages in history where the imperial narrative used to gain this upper hand. Actually, you're the undefeated tanky warlord and executive chairman of American Communist Party. That's how you define yourself. And definitely you are the host of Infrared Show. You are one of the top content creators and influencing figures. So I'm very glad to be hosting you in this episode.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor.
It's my pleasure, actually. So what motivated you to use your platform to speak out about Palestine and Lebanon, especially after the 7th of October, and especially that speaking about these causes is very costly? You know that this is associated with very high costs.
I'm aware, but what really made me compelled is that for a long time the media was monopolized from the top, by mainstream corporations and so on. Social media was a new opportunity, and I knew that instead of waiting for someone else to define the narrative, we need to step up using our voice to do that, especially when the censorship was relaxed on X because of Elon Musk's takeover. It was not a question, I knew that I had a responsibility.
Mm-hmm. So you've leveraged this flexibility with X to voice out your arguments, your conception of what's happening. Have you faced any challenges, censorship, or backlash due to your stance on the Palestinian cause? And what triggered you to talk about the Palestinian cause?
Actually, I faced censorship for many years, not before October 7th, because of my coverage of the war in Ukraine with Russia. I was banned from Twitch. I was also banned from X before Elon Musk took over, banned from Twitter. And my YouTube was beginning to be censored as well. So I understood what was going on. I understood what actors were involved. I understood what I was going up against. So when October 7th happened, I understood it as a new front had opened up in the global counter-hegemonic war, as I like to call it. And it was no question for me that in the same way that I covered the Russian special military operation, that the anti-Zionist cause needed to get perspective. I mean, one of the reasons people, I think, follow my content is because I also I try to educate people about what this war is really about. What is Zionism? Why is there resistance? What are they motivated by? And so on and so on.
How do you see the role of social media in shifting global narratives on resistance and occupation, and your role in particular?
Well, it's
educational, definitely.
Yeah, educational, and it's been a way that people can just bypass the mainstream media. Instead of listening to CNN and Fox News and all these other mainstream outlets, independent voices can have a unique way of having a relationship with audiences that allows them to think for themselves, and decide what they want to think. Based not on credentials awarded by some institution, but based on the merits,
Have you noticed a change in the audience engagement when covering Palestine compared to other global issues, especially that the algorithms of different social media platforms were biased towards one side of the argument or one side of the narrative?
I've noticed that regardless of how much they've tried to engineer it, the Palestinian issue has united all of the world's progressive forces of resistance and counter-hegemony across the entire planet, Africa, Latin America. Everyone is relating to the Palestinian cause. And it seems like that the engagement level is so high because there's such a profound degree of investment by people around the world in this particular issue, because I think they relate to it in their own ways. I think it's a symbol of all human struggle against oppression and so on and so on.
So it symbolizes this cause.
Of course.
Can you share a moment when your content significantly impacted public awareness or activism?
I think that I have given an interpretation of the events in a way that is also different ideologically. So, for example, many will couch their language in human rights and in terms of liberalism and so on, whereas I'm coming from more of a perspective of the rights and dignity of civilizations, for example. So I think that it's had an impact on people looking at the conflict differently, because they have an understanding that the motivations of the Palestinian people are not just they're not just the same thing as the motivations of a consumer who just wants to consume and so on. But here there are principles of dignity and honor and so on that are at stake. People didn't understand why the Houthis in Yemen were so willing to sacrifice so much and risk so much for the sake of the Palestinian people. And I think that what my content has done to that extent in terms of educating people is just explain to them that there are things people have motivations from that region that may not seem like they make sense to us, but they are, for them, it's a matter of honor. It's a kind of thing that has been lost, a concept that has been lost in the West, I think.
Exactly. Actually, I'd like to tell your audience that I'm hosting you here in Lebanon, and in your visit to the southern Lebanon, you've said, I've traveled to Lebanon to pay my respects to Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, hero of revolutionary forces and freedom-loving people worldwide. As the world prepares to enter a new stage of revolutionary struggle, his spirit will be more alive than ever. What does he mean to you? And do you think that the fate of the resistance in Lebanon and the resistance in general, the fate would be a bit dark with the martyrdom of these top leaders who were killed by Israel in the aftermath of October 7th and in the latest war which Israel had on Lebanon in September last year?
So the anti-Zionist cause, which is a cause of resistance, has had many stages. And there was no period darker, perhaps, than the beginning stages of the Lebanese Civil War and the Israeli occupation that ensued. At that time, there was no Hezbollah, there was no leaders, there was nothing. And from that gave birth to this movement of the resistance and so on. So it is a bad setback what's happened with the martyrdom of the top leaders of Hezbollah and the situation with Syria and so on. But I think it's never a cause for despair, because the resistance came from nothing. Before then there was nothing.
You were talking about the year 1982 maybe in Lebanon.
Yeah. So however bad the situation is now, it's not as bad as it was then. Still there's an infrastructure. Still there can be a continuation of what happened
there is a community.
Precisely. And what I think is that it's a setback, and it will require forces of resistance maybe to re-strategize and regroup and reassess the situation drastically. But for as long as the people are here, for as long as the same people, the same principles, the same values that were there before, it will be invincible. There's nothing that can be done to imperil it fully in the long term.
Yep. And I've asked you about how do you perceive Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah?
Well, since I was a child, I would always remember whenever he gave a speech, whenever he would appear in public, he was a source of hope. He was a source of courage. He was a source of bravery and dignity and honor for the community that I came from, especially. He was a source of pride for us. I grew up in America. I was born there, and that's really my homeland. But for my family, for my parents, for my wider community, he was a source of pride and dignity for us. And as far as what he represents to me, he represents defiance against overwhelming odds. Because let's remember, following the 1990s, we have thinkers like Francis Fukuyama who say this is the end of history. Western liberal democracy has prevailed over the entire world, neoliberalism, capitalism, and that's it. There's no more struggle over anything. And here you have Sayyid Nasrallah, who is humble son of the South, um, raising his rifle in defiance and in resistance of this so-called New World Order, you know. And that's very powerful to me. It's very powerful because he brought that revolutionary tradition from the 20th century into a new era. That's what he symbolized to me, you know.
So yeah, and he has shed light on Palestine more than ever before, and helped in re-raising maybe this issue. From your perspective, how was the global response to Palestine changed in recent years?
I think that this time, because of social media, you know, because of how much it's overtaken conventional mainstream forms of media, I think that this time around, the Palestinian issue has become unignorable. And it has penetrated discourses and languages and countries that were never really that familiar with it before. And I think that one of the reasons as well is because of the economic crisis the world is facing, you know, the long-term one I'm talking about, the long-term instability that's been created by this new kind of fourth industrial revolution and so on, the rise of inequality. I think that people around the world really relate to this issue because there are two emerging growing poles of global inequality. You know, on the one hand, people that are increasingly landless, people that are increasingly jobless, no dignity, no future, nothing. And then this overwhelming kind of police security state, which is protecting the 1% at their expense. And I think that people around the world are identifying with the Palestinian
with a massive pay gap and a lot of inequalities between the different classes, and the middle class is almost gone. So this resonates with your communist thoughts, I guess, which we will tackle in this episode.
But the Palestinian people, at the core of it, these are people that have been dispossessed of their land, you know, and this is what they're fighting for. So I think people around the world are relating to that. They're relating to that struggle and that striving to have dignity in the form of land and community and so on.
So the sentiment, the public sentiment regarding Israel's actions has changed since October 7th till now. You've witnessed that. Were you able to see this?
Yes, I was, because, and this is what the lesson should be. The lesson should be that the only reason Israel got away with its crimes for so long is because how meticulously and how aggressively they rigged mainstream media to fabricate a completely different reality. That took a lot of effort on their part. Hollywood, all of this narrative and discourse engineering that they had to do. So they had to put so much effort into lying to the world about the nature of the Zionist entity.
To create this narrative.
Leveraging
the power of mainstream media, which was the only prevailing media back then.
Yes, and it was very sensitive and vulnerable with the rise of social media, because now holes can be punched into the narrative. And this big kind of fake world, Hollywood world that they created, just collapsed. It's no longer, they can't sustain it anymore, basically.
Yeah. So Israel's recent aggression on Lebanon has drawn renewed attention to the interconnected struggles of the oppressed people, whether Lebanese, whether Palestinians, whether Russians, Ukrainians, I don't know. How do you address this link in your content?
Well, I think that the struggle, the way I see it, is that there are people that are struggling to assert the integrity of their communities, their legitimate historical communities, and their nations. And then there is another contravening force which represents the destruction of communities, the destruction of nations, the destruction of values. So, for example, in the case of the Zionist entity, we have a completely fake, fabricated nation and community at the expense of a real and organic one. In the case of Russia, we have the state of Ukraine, which is actually also kind of artificial from a historical perspective, trying to eliminate and exterminate the Russian-speaking peoples. In the case of Lebanon, it's very clear that the Zionist entity has expansionist aims toward the south. So you see that
they've expressed it out loud.
Of course, yeah.
It's not an analysis,
So it's a struggle for legitimately historically constituted peoples to defend their sovereignty and their dignity in the face of this nihilistic war against humanity itself, represented by Zionism.
Moving to some customized questions which are addressed particularly to Hazedine. You've mentioned that your fascination with Marxism began at the age of 12 and solidified during your freshman year at high school. What aspects of Marxist theory resonated with you at such a young age, at the age of 12?
Yeah.
And we're talking about Marxism. And how did they influence your view of the world?
Well, growing up in America, I could not confine myself with just one tradition of resistance and revolutionary resistance. I had to be exposed to all of the different traditions because I didn't grow up in Lebanon. I didn't grow up in the heart of the resistance.
You grew up in
America,
in a purely imperial capitalist society.
Right, and also a multicultural one.
Yeah.
And one where I could see there were many different victims of U.S. imperialism, including the American people themselves as well. So I was exposed to a broad revolutionary tradition. Is the more I studied and the more I learned about it. I was just in the same way I was fascinated by people like Sayed Nasrallah. I was exposed to people like Che Guevara, and Fidel, and Fidel Castro, and others throughout history. And then one of the common denominators I found is that there was such a proximity between the revolutionary tradition more generally and Marxism, right? So this is what basically exposed me to Marxism. To me, it seemed like something more universal and something that could be more shared by all mankind, all humanity, regardless of its different ethnic, national, and religious.
So your understanding of Western Marxism remained the same, or the framework, according to you, has changed a bit as you were exposed to different personalities or different political ideologies?
I think that growing up, the more I learned about Marxism, and originally I was more of a Western Marxist, because I was studying it in a purely academic way and so on and so on.
Within a Western context.
Within a Western context. But eventually, as I matured and grew older, I found really the way to philosophically and theoretically unite Marxist theory with the non-Western revolutionary traditions. And so before, in the beginning, what brought me to Marxism was that. Then when I became a Marxist, I kind of was more Eurocentric, only focused on the Western side. Then I came full circle and
you've injected a new blood to your theory.
Yeah, precisely.
So you've perceived your theory from a different perspective. Maybe you've perceived it as an outsider rather than being an insider within this Western context.
Yeah, but I was inside for a period, and then I synthesized it, I guess. And
you had a new synthesis. Right. You've been credited with developing the concept of MAGA communism, which seeks to blend the traditional communist ideas with a critique of the American establishment.
Yeah.
What motivated you to create this synthesis, which we've just tackled, and how do you define its core principles? And if I may add a sub-question, how it's linked to the resistance movements which you've advocated for?
That's a good question, because, Trump himself is never someone I could endorse on a personal level. Trump himself took credit
neither
for
Trump nor Biden, apparently.
Of course, yeah, of course.
Neither Republicans nor the Democrats.
But within the American context, the MAGA movement is very broad, it's very diverse, it's very vague, and it's not a closed and shut case. It's not just Trump. If you understand the demographic situation in the United States, you have people that are more traditional, conservative, how should I say, more outside the establishment, rural.
Exactly.
Actually comparable, my parents always used to compare these people to the people in the Jnub.
And the southern Lebanon.
Yeah, of course. So these people were dissatisfied with the system. They were angry at the establishment. They were angry at the mainstream Republicans and the mainstream Democrats.
The hegemony.
The hegemony, right. So the rise of the MAGA movement was a new era in American politics, which just broadly represented this ability to have a political position outside the mainstream. So even people on the left were being called MAGA, whether they liked it or not. And MAGA just came to represent, for a long time the Democrats tried to say it was a Russian creation. And the reason is because they could see clearly that this movement did not have its origins in the American hegemony. So they saw it as non-American, right? In reality, it came from the American people mainly. And that is something alien to our establishment and our elites, because they're separated from the people. So for me, MAGA communism was really about, because it's confusing to people outside of America to understanding our politics sometimes, I think, because in America, Western leftists and Marxists and communists, they associate themselves with the elite in the coast. You know, they associate themselves in Ivy League universities and very fringe LGBT phenomena and so on and so on. And they are declaring war against the entire majority of the country. Now, sometimes those people will superficially express solidarity with people in the global south and so on and so on, but it's not sincere.
Maybe they express this solidarity in terms of being more diverse and inclusive.
Precisely.
As you're being more diverse and inclusive with the LGBT communities
Precisely.
Not based on people being oppressed, people being hegemonized.
So it wasn't sincere. So for me, MAGA communism was about, we need to develop revolutionary forces of resistance within America, and the people that will be the most receptive to that will be from the MAGA movement. It won't be from these liberal cities or LGBT nonsense and whatever. And so for me, it was very simple. MAGA was a way that we can renationalize American politics at the expense of the American empire. So instead of an American empire that's intervening in the Middle East and intervening around the world, we just focus on our own domestic issues. We pull out military bases and military spending around the world. We stop interfering and meddling in foreign affairs, and we focus politics completely on the internal conflict and struggle. So to me, that was the point of MAGA communism. It was about it wasn't about American chauvinism, as some of my critics, for some reason, tried to say. It was the opposite. It was about, we have our own problems and our own country. Let's just focus on that, and let's stop bothering and oppressing the world.
Exactly. As a leading figure in the Infrared Collective, how do you envision its role in contemporary political discourse, and what are the collective's primary objectives? And if you can link these objectives to the resistance movements.
Yeah, of course. So we are witnessing the rise of a multipolar world, we like to call it, right?
Exactly.
And multipolarity can only be defined negatively for now, which is we are against American
the unipolar
hegemony.
world.
Precisely. Exactly. But I think there is something missing, which is a unifying and integral ideological and historical kind of narrative and outlook. So for Infrared, we are trying to link the history of Marxism and Marxism-Leninism, including an understanding of, the criticisms of some of the shortcomings and so on and so on. It's not a blind dogma. But we think that the 20th century is not fully resolved. People believe that because in 1991 the Soviet Union collapsed, that it's a closed and shut case, and Fukuyama was more or less right, and so on and so on. What we're interested in Infrared in doing is crafting a new global outlook that synthesizes the experience of 20th century Marxism with also post-Marxist revolutionary traditions, including the Iranian Revolution and the resistance forces in Lebanon and Palestine and so on and so on. And we are trying to bring all of these strands and threads together into one coherent worldview and outlook, which we think is an alternative to the mainstream Western liberalism. Yeah, precisely.
So, serving as the executive chairman of the plenary communists of the plenary committees in the American Communist Party, what prompted the establishment of this political party, and how it differentiates itself from the leftist organizations in the U.S.?
We were trying very hard for many years to influence an old party called the Communist Party USA. Exactly. That party, in our view, epitomized all of the shortcomings, the stagnation, the corruption, and the bankruptcy of the traditional Western Marxists and leftists in America and in Europe and so on and so on. But we tried very hard to reform that party, and at every turn, the corruption and the lack of any kind of organizational integrity and so on interfered with the ability for anything to get. I mean, the people that ran that party were not interested in giving new life to communist ideas. They just wanted to remain the same and vote for the Democratic Party and so on and so on. So after many years, we resolved to reconstitute the party ourselves, taking many of the clubs and organs of the
it was a kind of re-engineering maybe.
Yeah.
And your meeting with the Russian philosopher Alexander Dugin in March 2024 had an impact on changing your perspectives on the geopolitics and your theoretical framework?
Well, I had been a reader of Dugin's for many, many years before then, actually.
Definitely.
So he was also someone...
he already had an impact before March 2024.
Of course, because he's the philosopher, I think,
Exactly.
of multipolarity in general.
Exactly.
And so when I was able to meet Dugin, that was a great honor for me, because he had already influenced my outlook to a great extent.
الدين, your robust political ideology and your role in the American Communist Party, in addition to your voice in the Infrared show, has made you a very active voice, a role model in showing this face of the narrative, the narrative of the oppressed, and giving it the upper hand in comparison to the decades of oppression. I highly thank you for being a guest in Sardية.
Thank you so much. It's an honor. Thank you.